What's good, Family Ghosts? Today we're not doing a channel checkup, instead we're going to be reviewing Drakan as I finally completed the game, The Ancient Gates. And I want to talk about it. Right off the rip, this game is memorable. Like, going back and looking at some old footage or just replaying old stages, and I'm looking at it, I'm like, wow, that feels like it was so forever ago, but I remember everything that happened in this area. I remember how cool this area looked. It has a way, like, even though it's not complete, fully fleshed out game, from what I've heard, they have to cut a lot of stuff out of the game. Even though it's not like fully complete and fully realized, it holds a large amount of satisfaction just from exploring the world of Drakan The Ancient Gates, and it just really feels nice to actually complete it, and then going back, oh, that's the spot when they pop out and do this and blah blah blah. So you know, that's something that just really caught me as I'm replaying it again. Also, one thing that really comes to the forefront when I have to talk about this game is how much there is to it. Drakan The Ancient Gates, on a surface level, is a very simplistic game. You know, and if you know me, you know I'm all about combat-based games with good combat that has a nice back and forth, a lot of defense. Drakan is a game, while I have some gripes and I have some negatives to take about it, and I'll talk about that later, what Drakan really specializes in is that it has a lot of openness to it. It has a lot of layers upon layers and layers. It doesn't function in a way that is like, here's the mechanics of everything. We want you to focus in on the way that we designed it to play, and we want you to experience that, you know, exactly pinpoint the way that we want you to experience it. Drakan The Ancient Gates is more like the player is able to wield it. You know, however far that they can take it is however far that it's going to go. I started to realize that this is true for every level of the game. From the movement, at first I discovered, like, oh, here's the standard movement. Is there a way to improve that? Okay, here's this something else that might be better. And then a little later on, I'm like, oh, this might be some secret tech to move even faster. Okay, here, da 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 da. And then I find out, oh, there's tech beyond the tech beyond the tech. Now y'all just making shit up. So we go from standard to, okay, well, let's optimize it. The next step is, okay, this is some hidden stuff. And then the next layer is, okay, now y'all just making things up. Y'all just making whatever you want and just tossing it in, like, ain't no way. And that's the layers that you go through from pretty much every functionality of the game, from movement to combat to you know, whichever concepts that you engage in this game. It has, you know, those extra layers to it, and those are all exploits. This game is an exploit fest, but it never really feels like over exploiting. It's like the game is designed for you to exploit, you know, under a magical amount of circumstances, and you know, it just all tends to work in the game's favor somehow, and to make it feel more fun. Of course, there's a lot of glitches that speedrunners typically do, you know, glitching through walls to skip 5 to 10 to 20 hours of the game, you know, stuff like that is in the game. But even beyond that, there's just so much within that is fun to mess around with, and that's something that you have to give this game huge props on. Even if unintentionally, it still works in the game's favor. That's what makes it a fun thing to try to play and experiment with. Moving on, as we take this and transition into the combat. Now, to me, a good game with combat is one that has the 3 integrities: movement, offense, and defense. A game has to have a balance, not over representing any one of these 3. They have to be a nice harmonized balance. And that's one thing that we have to talk about regarding Drakan. Is it's not something that completely fills out the entire billing for the three integrities of a good combat game. We have to go through the three categories individually. Drakan is a game that has a priority of offense, but the offense is not harmonized with movement, but the offense is harmonized with defense. The movement is harmonized with defense, and what this translates into is that when you're on offense, you're typically standing in one space. You're not creating space going in, going out. You typically stand your ground and you claim your spot, and that's typically how it plays out. You get in and then you do your things, and it kind of becomes a bit of a cluster fest, you know. So that's a point that is hard to overlook, but there are some enemies that are exceptions to this. Let's talk about where the game shines is on a difficulty level. The Ancient Gates is a game that is not difficult on a enemy by enemy scale. The Ancient Gates is difficult on a scale of accumulation over time and circumstance. What I'm trying to say is that when there's one enemy in front of you, it's not typically where the game shines. That's typically where it becomes that cluster fest. You see the limitations of AI, and that's definitely not the shining part. That's a bit of a low part for this game. Where this game starts to shine is when they throw 2 or more enemies at you. That's when a game starts to enforce the 3 integrities. It's forced to make the player do these things. So movement is a mandatory thing when that happens. Another instance where the 3 integrities are enforced is when there are long-ranged enemies, and these are typically the hardest enemies and encounters in the game. So that's when the game reaches its highest level of urgency. So yeah, that's the offense side of integrity than what it lacks. Defense is definitely one of the funnest parts of the play, but it doesn't start off that way. It starts off, you know, feeling the same way with the offense. You know, it doesn't feel like it has the movement harmony with integrity. You know, it starts to feel like that stand and play stagnant type of ordeal, because you got to get used to the clunkiness of this being like a whatever it is. It kind of has a clunkiness feel to it. And it isn't until you start to getting used and accustomed to maneuvering the control schemes and learning how to dig into the deeper layers of the unintentional but yet meaningful and impactful extras that the game has beneath its hood to help the combat, that it starts to feel more and more evolved and more something that you want to practice and get good at. And that's what makes this game, in my opinion, because it's always something that you can dig into. Even though it's such a simple game, everything is front and center. The extra layers and the dig in beneath the hood layers, levels where the skill ceiling rises. You know, unintentionally or intentionally, the skill ceiling rises to whatever the player is able to do. And that's something that I think all games should aspire to have. What else were we talking about? Movement is pretty good. There's multiple ways to move. We talked about the tech beyond the tech. That's how I opened this up with, and that's pretty much all I need to say. It's kind of, movement is tank controls, but it doesn't really feel all that bad to me. It just kind of has a limitation on you. Like if your enemy's chasing you or you're running, you kind of have to do a little bit of maneuvering to get away smoothly and cleanly. So yeah, movement's pretty good. It's dope. It harmonizes pretty much with everything except for the offense. It's a little struggle. You have to work to get it though. You know, you have to work to get those things to be all in one harmonized flow. So let's talk about styles. Styles upon styles. This game is an RPG, action RPG, very early, but it feels pretty modern. So the game functions in 3 styles. It has melee combat, basically swords, you know, weapon type of stuff. It has archery, and it has magic. And you put your ranking, the experience points into these 3 categories. They don't affect your damage per se, they just affect what you can equip. So you can go through the whole game and without putting anything in anything, and you'll still be well off, because there is no defense stat There is no offense stat. It's just, you want to equip this? Are you able to equip this or not? And that's pretty much it. So with melee is, in my opinion, the primary style of combat in the game. And I say that because it has all the functionalities available, all the options and tools available for the player to dig into. The ability to guard and parry, for instance, where it deflects all damage. But if you equipped other stuff, then you have a shield to protect you from like a percentage of damage. And only with melee can you utilize these tools for defense. I consider those, even though it's 3 styles, they're really just 2. Right, melee and long range. You can't play defense with long range. You don't have that option. And that's why I feel like those are more complementary styles and side styles more so than their main styles, because they don't have that ability to become dynamic. They encourage the player to have a lame it out approach. You know, that lack of dynamic and options encourages the players to stay long distance, use environments, and just try to win. You know, there's no real getting up close and making things happen. It's just, it is what it is. You have long range, stay long range. You know, and the AI isn't really programmed to combat this that well. Even if you put all of your stats into those 2 range styles, you're still going to end up coming back to melee at some point, because melee is the only style that has every option available, including long range. So I just don't feel like those are really fleshed out enough to stand on their own. There's still strats to be discovered in each one of these styles, so I can't say, you know, it's there for flavor. It's there for flavor, and it changes the approach to the game at the very least. Let's talk about how the game feels satisfactory-wise. Combat-wise, the game is very satisfying to just progress in. It's very satisfying to pull things off. But moving away from combat and getting into the makeup of the game, like the build-up, the game always feels like it's lacking. It's very anticlimactic, like typically regarding boss fights. Not just story arcs, but just boss fights in general. Like the game will build some player up and you're expecting a big climax out of it, but then it just feels like an ordinary stroll in the park. Like the bosses never feel like they're equipped to be in the position that they're in. Like they're always missing so much of their health pool. Like it feels like they should have at least triple the amount that they're given. Because of things like this, it just feels anticlimactic because it comes and goes so fast that it drags the game down a bit. Like you're expecting to have this grand, you know, shebang with everything that you've learned and have gone through learning the ropes of this map area and all the tricks and whatever that this map is throwing at you, only to just have it just being like, okay, this is more of a standard, you know, it doesn't really have that zing, that boom, that kick. It just kind of just rolls. And you know, there's some that's pretty good, but majorly they just all feel anticlimactic. And this is something that has a similarity and a history with the Drakan series, because the first game, Order of the Flame, also had this problem. I haven't played Order of the Flame, the PC game, but I have looked and observed and done a decent amount of research, and that seems to be the one thing that they have the most in common. But speaking of the similarities, Drakan, Order of the Flame, and the Ancient Gates, here's where I have to knock the Ancient Gates down a bit. Because I was enjoying the Ancient Gates and just completely mind blown by how they were able to pull everything off, only to come into the realization that a mountain full amount of the assets are reused from the first game. I guess that's not that big of a shock, but just some are just straight up copy and paste it into the second game. You know, it gets to that point, like from levels, from traps, from enemies, I guess sequence of events. You know, it's like they were working on a sequel to Drakan, and from what I've read, something have to be scrapped, and so they have to scrap the original Drakan 2, which it was called, and then they went in with the PS2 exclusive version that became what it is. I've seen Drakan 2. There's footage of it, or screenshots of it, and it looks more like the first game, the PC game, and the PS2 game that we ended up getting looks a bit different. The art style is completely different. It's less rough, rugged, and dark and themey. It's less of that and more of a cartoony mascot type of thing. But yeah, speaking of Drakan 1 and Drakan 2, there's one thing that absolutely cannot be denied, and that is that Drakan Order of the Flame is far and away a better representation of Drakan. Like, one might even say it's a better game. That's debatable. I'm willing to give it that, but I'm willing to give it more in the presentation department. The music, by far, different atmospheres, stratospheres, different cosmos. The music in Order of the Flame is far superior, decimates anything that appears in the Ancient Gates. Is that much of disparity. The music in the Order of the Flame is classical PC 1990s goodness. You know, it reminds me so much of classic RuneScape. It has so much of it just makes you feel good when you hear it. You know, it sets you in the mood for an adventure. And then when you listen to the Ancient Gates, it sounds like music that you hear when you pop in a DVD and get to the main menu, right? And that's what the music consists of in the Ancient Gates. But other than that, just from the presentation alone, the story from the first game, the characters, the maps, I like when maps have a verticality to them. You got stairs, and you got hidden archways, and you got designated areas that you can only reach by going down a flight or by going up a flight. Ant system of verticality, and you know, it creates much more of a lively and enjoyable feeling trying to traverse such a crafted map like that. All these things are better in Order of the Flame, by the way. Not just that alone. In the first game, it had a lot of story-driven and just impactful moments that made you associate certain things with whatever you found or whatever you went and do. In the second game, even though there's a much more NPCs on the surface level, on paper it reads off as more lively because it has more life placed in areas. I think it is more dead inside, and it's more ghastly, simply for the simple fact that there are no events associated with any of the cities in the Ancient Gates. It's all just surface level fluff. It never gets to that point where things change. It's there from the beginning, and it's going to be there at the end, and nothing changes. Nothing really happens to make it feel alive, so it just falls flat in that regard. Whereas in the first game, even though it has less, you still associate it as having more for the more impactful moments that make you remember what happens at that specific point in time. And that's another area where it misses the mark in the sequel. Yeah, I guess it's just up to you to decide. I think that the combat system and the mechanics are more fleshed out and smoother quote unquote in the sequel. Definitely a different approach in that regard, but as far as the premier Drakan experience, you can't deny that, you know, it is what it is. That covers pretty much everything, I think. So let's round this thing up and rank it. This is like my third time making this because I've been messing with my mic, trying to get everything just right before I go back in and put it in a body of work. So we're gonna rank the game. I rank my games based on 4 categories: gameplay, presentation, replayability, and the 4th ranking is just whatever that I feel like the game best presents. So gameplay, I already said so much about it. It's definitely the gold mine of the games, the only thing that's going to keep you coming back for more. The secrets, not just in the world that the game loosely builds, that the game starts off with and seldomly builds. It's not an open world game, but it's so big. It starts off quasi open world, but then it just kind of narrows down into like a linear experience with side content. But yeah, this is so much sauce to be found within the mechanics of the game, less so in the world, but all in the mechanics, and just trying to improve on those things as an individual, as somebody who wants to hold a tool, you know, like holding a weapon and getting good with that. The game is satisfying, and like this is like massive shortcuts and stuff that you can take. I found out that there's a way to avoid fall damage, and that just opens up a whole new avenue for things that you can do, and that's like, whoa. Like how many more stuff am I going to find out? 10,000 feet in the air and avoid fall damage? Okay, let me find out how to do it. You know, like it's situational, but it can be done. So yeah, it's fun to mess around with, and I gotta give an 87. I would give presentation an 82, even though it cops off a lot of what the first game laid down, and sometimes it's blatantly just copies and pasted. It's still good. Like it's still, you know, it's still fun. I think that just going back to gameplay as well. The fact that there are shops and the game like overcompensates you with goodies and pampers you with potions or whatever. It's like they're not confident in the game being playable, so they overcompensate. So I feel like that drags it down for me, because in the first game it was just like, hey, you just better get good at this. Just better get good. When the second game is they kind of pamper you a lot, but it has a decent, good difficulty curve. It never gets too much one way, too much the other way, although sometimes it gets a little too easy. Again, when they throw you the multiple enemies or the ranged enemies, that's when the game really starts to find its wholesomeness and comes into the 3 harmonies of integrity, combat, offense, movement, and defensive. None of that had to do with presentation. I give presentation an 82. It's good. It's good, but the music isn't all that great. It's kind of just whatever. But there's definitely memorable moments that you'll feel fond of. Replayability. Now, I wasn't sure how I would rank this at first, but now after finding so much hidden tech, it's got me wanting to play it again. Like, I've already started a playthrough, and I just got a copy of the game. I'm going to start it on my console as well, because I got a new console. And I'm going to start a 3rd playthrough. So I guess I'm digging it a lot. Like, I haven't played any other game this many times. Well, I played Parasite Eve a lot, so you know what? I'm just going to give replayability a 88. So yeah, the 4th ranking, we're going to have the 4th ranking be how well does the game stick the landing. I know I'm making up bullshit rankings, just deal with it. It's kind of the kink in the armor. It has a good premise, has a good build and a good middle, and then it's like right at the climax is like the climax, we're ranking climax alone. Climax would get a 20. We're ranking the entire experience, sticking the landing. Shit. We'll give it a 65. And the game does not stick shit. And that would give us a score 80.5 or an 81. If we were to just judge everything without that though, we'll put in like openness for the player to explore its mechanics and grow blah 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 blah. That's the fourth ranking. I would give that an 89. So if we were to rank that, that brings the game up to an 87. I have to pull a lot of bullshit to get this ranking. So y'all, a lot of bullshit. That's my personal feelings for the game. It's an 87. I projected it as a 90. Didn't quite maintain that 90, but it's still maintaining a large piece of my heart. And so yeah, there's a lot of moments that I just remember just looking at it and it's like, oh, that was so sick, that was so cool. You know, it has that impact. So I would definitely recommend this to any and everybody who are on the fence. It lasts, like it transports you through time. Like it doesn't, time kind of becomes misconstrued while you're playing it. And it feels like, oh man, I've been through so much. But I guess it is kind of a long game too. It's kind of like 30 hours. That's my ranking for Drakan The Ancient Gates. My personal ranking for somebody who likes playing games for gameplay, it's an 87. For somebody who likes story, presentation, and you know, it's going to be closer to that 80 for you or less. It has everything that I want more games to have, and then it does it in a good way that if this were any other game probably would have fell on its face. But for this game, it all comes together. It turns a dry bowl of soup and it adds the seasoning. It cooks it in the microwave rather than just eating the pack of soup dry, you know, crunchy dry. Even though that's still good, it tastes good, you know, but you know, I ain't your health advisor. That's gonna be my wrap up for Drakan The Ancient Gates. I may have promised that I would never show this game on my channel again. I lied, and I will lie again in the future. I'm definitely going to play this again, a full playthrough again sometime later down the road, because I think this game is that legit, albeit clunky, and you know, dealing with some problems. I think it's legit. So may peace be with. Always keep your heads up. Deuces, those posts, adios, stay cool. And if you like this content, be sure to show some love. But always be sure to show that love to the people who matter to you. This is ITOwl bidding you farewell. Peace, much love, and stay cool. Deuces. So remember when I said that there was only really two styles, close range and long range, saying like the range styles aren't really fully complete styles because they're not as dynamic? Well, about that. So I went and I was doing, you know, some extra playing. There's stuff there that I didn't know about. This game just keeps on producing, man. This game has tech within tech within tech within tech within tech, even though it's simple as all can be. And none of it is intentional. That's the sickest part about it. But it all just works. Archery has its own style. Archery is definitely the hardest, but it's also got the quickest, rapidest approach for range, but it doesn't have any defensive options. That's the weakness about that. Your only defense with that is rolling, quick rolling, and acrobatics. You know, that's the best you can get. And you could probably do like a quick swap. You just gotta be real precise with your execution on trying to do it properly. And it can be very, very challenging to do it. It's a big execution, you know, if you wanted to play it more dynamically. Mage, similarly but less. Mage is definitely the easiest one, but it also has the most recovery time, so you can't really get up close that much. But it does have a defensive option, and it's tech to be discovered. I won't disclose any of it. You can find it if you look around, or if you experimented with it yourself. That joy should be for you to discover on your own, and I won't spoil that for you in this review rambling that I'm doing. So peace be with you, brother, with you, sister, and this time for real, I'm gonna be out, and peace into the world, and I'll leave y'all with the outro.